the White House South Lawn, members of the Indian community have gathered here in large numbers. The vibe and symbolism are hard to miss, but this visit promises to deliver more than optics. This is being called Prime Minister Modi's most substantial visit. What did it achieve? What does it mean for the India-US relationship and the changing world order? Catch all the updates and analysis with me, Palki Sharma, only on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Vantage USA. It's Prime Minister Modi's day 2 here in Washington DC, and it is the big day. The yoga event and the meeting with Elon Musk were just the trailer. This is the real deal. Prime Minister Modi is inside the White House as we speak. He received a ceremonial welcome from President Biden. It's part of the pomp during state visits, sort of like the biggest red carpet. The two leaders are holding their all-important bilateral talks now. It's expected to last around 1 hour or more. In the afternoon, there are more engagements lined up, an address to the US Congress, the state banquet. So lots to watch out for in the next couple of hours here in Washington, D.C. You can catch all the live updates on Firstpost, and we'll be tracking the developments from the White House. But first, the headlines. Russia accuses Ukraine of striking a key bridge in Crimea. The bridge links southern Ukraine to the Crimean Peninsula. Moscow says Kiev used long-range British missiles in the attack and that the attack was ordered by London. South Korea's ruling party stirs up anti-China sentiments amid rising tensions. President Yoon's party seeks to limit voting and health rights of Chinese nationals living in South Korea. Beijing had recently warned Seoul on betting against China and backing the US. The rift within the Maldivian government deepens. Former President Mohammad Nasheed quits the ruling party. This comes ahead of presidential elections in September. But Nasheed says he will continue to be the Speaker of Parliament. In India, rain wreaks havoc in the northeastern state of Assam. Torrential rain leads to floods. More than 100,000 people have been affected in 20 districts. India's Met Department says heavy rains will continue for the next few days. And it's a battle of the billionaires. Elon Musk challenges Mark Zuckerberg to a cage fight. The Meta CEO shoots back, asking for the location. The banter started when Musk mocked reports of Meta launching a potential Twitter rival. Let's start with a recap of yesterday. After wrapping up the yoga session, the Prime Minister left New York. His next stop was here in Washington, D.C. He landed at the Andrews base in Maryland. It's the same base used by the US President and other dignitaries. Now, after the arrival, Prime Minister Modi got down to business. His first engagement was at a skill development event. It was organized by the National Science Foundation. First Lady Jill Biden was also present there. The Prime Minister pitched for a pipeline of talent pool between the two countries. He said it's key to sustaining the momentum of growth. Listen to this.
आज भारत और अमेरिका को ग्रोथ का मोमेंटम बनाए रखने के लिए एक पाइपलाइन ऑफ टैलेंट उसकी भी जरूरत है, जहां एक और अमेरिका के पास उच्च कोटि के शिक्षण संस्थान है, एडवांस टेक्नोलॉजीज है, वहीं भारत के पास विश्व की सबसे बड़ी युवा फैक्ट्री है.
Now, skilling is a big part of India's vision. We have the largest youth population in the entire world, and we will continue to have it until 2030. So, India is primed for a demographic dividend. And the Prime Minister has talked about this before. He's also launched the Skill India mission. Around 10 million youth get training every year under this scheme in India. Let's come back to Washington, D.C. After the skill event, Modi had 3 important sit-downs. 2 of them were with titans of the chip industry, the CEOs of Micron and Applied Materials. We talked about India's chip ambitions yesterday. The entire world is looking to diversify the supply chain, and India has signed up for that. India wants to emerge as a chip power in the 21st century. And from the looks of it, the CEOs agree. Listen to this.
And I really believe that the opportunity for India's growth in the semiconductor industry is now. This is India's time to drive incredible growth, and Applied is very, very much looking forward to working together with the Prime Minister and everyone in India.
The third important sit-down was with Lawrence Culp. He is the CEO of General Electric. Does the name ring a bell? General Electric is the same company that is expected to sign a jet engine deal with India. It's probably the biggest deliverable of this trip. Only 4 countries have jet engine technology. If the US shares it with India, it could be a big deal. The Prime Minister appreciated GE's plans to manufacture in India. He also invited them to play a bigger role in Indian aviation. Nothing about the deal though. So meetings done. It was time for the main event of the day. Prime Minister Modi headed to the White House. He was welcomed by President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. They spoke for a couple of minutes. They shared a joke or two perhaps, posed for pictures and then disappeared into the White House. Now this wasn't the ceremonial welcome. It was a private dinner between Biden and Modi. The two leaders also exchanged some gifts. We'll talk about that later. So that was day 1 in Washington, D.C., done and dusted. Now let's talk about day 2. A couple of hours back, the Prime Minister returned to the White House. We've been here this whole time, and this time it was a ceremonial welcome. Take a look at how that played out.
See the handshake and 4 strokes. The shot of
It's Thursday morning in Washington, D.C. It's a rainy, drizzly morning, but it seems even the weather gods cannot rain on this big party. There is a lot of excitement in the air. We are in the south lawns of the White House. I'm sure you can hear the people chanting, and a lot of people have gathered here. People from the Indian community who've come from across the United States of America to greet Prime Minister Modi, to witness his ceremonial welcome in the White House. There's a lot of excitement in the air. I'm not sure how much sense you can make amid all the sound, but it's quite infectious, I have to say. And according to some reports, tens of thousands of people registered to attend this event. The weather has not helped, but that has not dampened the enthusiasm, and we'll wait and see how this plays out in the day ahead.
Critical and emerging technologies, the pillar of our next generation partnership, to ensure that these technologies promote and protect our values, remain open, accessible, and trusted and secure. We face an inflection point, one of those moments that only come around every several generations, when so much is changing technologically, politically, socially, and environmentally, that the decisions we make today are going to determine our future for decades to come. 2 great nations, 2 great friends, 2 great powers that can define the course of the 21st century.
Friends, भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के समाज और व्यवस्थाएं लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों पर आधारित है। इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी। ग्लोबल गुड के लिए वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए दोनों देश साथ मिलकर काम करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है।
Like I said, the bilateral is underway. President Biden and Prime Minister Modi have plenty to discuss. Defense, China, trade, Ukraine, climate change, a host of issues that concern both the countries. We'll keep you updated about the joint statement as and when it comes out. It's definitely one to watch out for. After the White House, the Prime Minister will head to the US Capitol. He will be addressing a joint session of the Congress. It's his second time doing so. Modi had addressed a joint session in 2016 during the Obama presidency. Now, the address doesn't have policy implications, but it is full of symbolism. It is very significant. A, it tells you that there is bipartisan support for India. Both Democrats and Republicans want stronger ties with New Delhi. And B, it's a mark of respect. Only a handful of leaders have addressed the US Congress twice, and Modi will be the first Indian to do so. After the speech of the Congress, the Prime Minister will return to the White House. Here he will attend the state banquet. Again, no policy implications here, but a state dinner is also full of symbolism. Biden has given just 2 of them in his presidency, 2 state dinners, one to France and one to South Korea. So what can you expect at the state dinner? Well, both leaders will speak, but it's more of a relaxed atmosphere. Expect some good music, some jokes, some good food. Now, the president's spouse handles the state dinner. That's Jill Biden, the First Lady of the United States, and she gave a preview on what to expect. Listen in.
We are bringing together the world's oldest and the world's largest democracies. As some of you may know, Prime Minister Modi is a vegetarian. So we asked Chef Nina Curtis, a plant-based pioneer, to work with our White House chefs and create a stunning vegetarian menu.
One of the special items on the menu is millets. The first course is marinated millet with corn salad and watermelons. It's actually a nod to India. New Delhi pushed to declare 2023 as the International Year of Millets, and Prime Minister Modi has himself championed this. Even in New York, he talked about the health benefits of millets. Looks like the White House agrees. We'll be tracking all of this closely. But tomorrow is Prime Minister's last day in the US. He will meet Vice President Kamala Harris for lunch. He also has that big diaspora event lined up, and then at night he will fly out to Egypt. So far, this trip has been a great success. But a lot hinges on today. Biden and Modi need a successful bilateral today. They need to cement this relationship for decades to come. Can they do it? We'll have an answer by tonight. They say actions speak louder than words, but sometimes a gift does the same. Because while diplomacy is about the art of war, it's also about the art of gifting. And India knows this well. The ancient Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, says that a gift should be given to the right person at the right time and at the right place. Centuries later, this is still a practice in diplomatic gifting. Yesterday, Prime Minister Modi gifted presents to US President Joe Biden and the First Lady. What were they? And what meaning do they hold? We'll tell you. Also, what becomes of such diplomatic gifts, especially the unusual ones? Here's a report.
According to an ancient Indian text, completing the age of 80 years in 8 months is an important milestone. It's when an individual becomes Drishta Sahasra Chandro, one who has seen 1,000 full moons. According to Hindus, this is a matter of celebration. But it could also be more. For instance, a creative gifting idea. On Wednesday, US President Joe Biden hosted Prime Minister Modi for an intimate dinner at the White House. They discussed a wide range of issues. There was also a musical tribute to Indian culture. But something else stole the show. We're talking about the gifts that were exchanged between Prime Minister Modi and the Bidens, and each of these presents hold a deep meaning. Prime Minister Modi gifted Joe Biden a Mysore sandal box to signify Drishta Sahas Chandro, the ritual we just told you about. The box contains the idol of Lord Ganesha, the deity invoked by Hindus to celebrate the beginning of auspicious occasions. Along with this, the box includes an oil lamp and 10 other gifts sourced from different states in India. These not only showcase the country's colourful diversity, but also symbolize Dastanam, meaning 10 donations. But this wasn't the only gift. Biden is known to admire the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, who had deep admiration for India. He was influenced by Indian spirituality, which includes the Upanishads, the religious and philosophical treatises of Hinduism. Yeats co-authored the translation of this book, so Prime Minister Modi gifted Biden its first edition print. He also presented First Lady Dr. Jill Biden with a gift, a 7.5 carat lab-grown diamond, which has the properties of an earth-mined diamond, showcasing eco-friendly cutting-edge technology. But here's the thing about exchanging diplomatic gifts. It's rarely a one-way street. So the Bidens too presented Prime Minister Modi with gifts, including a handmade antique American book galley from the early 20th century, a vintage American camera, an archival facsimile print of George Eastman's patent of the first Kodak camera, a hardcover book on American wildlife photography, and a signed first edition copy of collected poems of Robert Frost. Quite an eclectic collection of gifts, right? But question is, why is diplomatic gifting such a big deal? Because these gifts are so much more than pretty-looking objects. They are meant to welcome, honor, and cultivate diplomatic relations. They emphasize the workmanship of local businesses, the culture of a nation, and its historical craftsmanship. which is why so much thought went into Modi and Biden's gifts. But this tradition is not new by any means. The earliest record is traced to Egypt, where engraved stone vessels were given to Egypt's Hittite neighbors. Since then, this art of gifting has transformed and gotten more creative. In the 1950s, the Chinese government was known for its panda diplomacy because they began sending their national animal, the pandas, to foreign governments. And if you think that's bizarre, there's more. In 2015, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov gave the US Secretary of State 2 baskets of potatoes and tomatoes. In 2021, the late Queen Elizabeth gave Biden the gift of herself. Literally, she gifted him a photo of herself in a silver frame. World leaders have also received rollerblades, a ping-pong table, crocodile insurance, and even a Komodo dragon as gifts. But as fun and bizarre as the world of diplomatic gift-giving is, what comes next is slightly complicated. Legal frameworks. Different countries have different laws as to what happens to these gifts. They're highly regulated and you keep the gifts when you leave office. And there's trouble if you do. Like former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan is finding out. Sometimes human errors have also been made with gifts. In 2013, the government of Mali gifted France a camel, which the French slaughtered for a feast. Mali wasn't impressed. Such mishaps can complicate diplomatic relations. So diplomatic gifting is a tricky business. But the Indian Prime Minister seems to have mastered the art with his thoughtful gifts. And we're glad that this time no one presented a picture of themselves along with a reptile insurance.
Talking about gifts, it looks like the US has one for India too. Reports say America will ease visa rules for skilled Indian workers, an announcement that could be made during Prime Minister Modi's visit. What does it mean? Well, basically, it will be easier for Indian workers to live and work in the United States. The visa in focus here rather, is the H-1B visa. The H-1B is a non-immigrant visa. It allows American companies to employ foreign workers in specialty occupations, the kind of jobs that require technical or theoretical expertise. That's where this visa applies. Now, it's a favorite of most tech companies, the likes of Infosys, Tata Consultancy Services, Amazon, Google. All of them use this visa, the H-1B visa, to hire thousands of workers, and most of them come from India. Now, the H-1B visa, you can imagine, is much sought after. Many call it the golden goose. Every year, the American government offers some 65,000 H-1B visas. They go to companies that want skilled foreign workers. Then there is an additional 20,000 visas. Now, those are workers with advanced degrees. An H-1B visa usually lasts for 3 years. It can then be renewed for another 3 years. That is the procedure. Now, Indians are the most active users of the H-1B program. In the year 2022, there were a total of 442,000 H-1B workers, 442,000. Out of these, Indians made up 73% of the bulk. That's more than 322,000 people, 322,000 people. Sounds like a good thing for India, but the H-1B visa has a big catch. And this is about its renewal. How do you get the visa renewed? To do this, you have to go out of the US. You can't get it renewed while you're still in America. You have to go out, usually to your own country. Once the visa is renewed, you have to get the extension stamped on your passport. And this stamping is not done in the United States. It can only be done at a US consulate. So what most people do is this. They travel to their home country, they submit their H-1B visa, and then they wait. And this wait can last for months, even years. Imagine that. You need your visa renewed. You have work in America, but you're stuck for over a year in your home country waiting for the visa. Sometimes your families are in the United States and they're waiting for the visa extension. It can be a cumbersome and complicated process, and honestly, it doesn't have to be. Until the year 2004, the H-1B could be renewed or stamped inside the United States. And now the Biden administration could start that again. They could revive that old practice. This will allow Indians to renew their visas in the US. They won't have to travel abroad. And this is part of a pilot program. It will first include a handful of skilled workers. The program will then be expanded over the years. The pilot program will also be available to some L1 visas. Now, these are for people transferring within a company to a position in the US. They move from one company to another in America. Now, if approved, this will be a major relief for Indian tech officials. They will not have to leave the country or their families for just a visa restamping process. And this helps in more ways than one. It helps the Americans too. If people can renew their visas in the US, it frees up resources for visa interviews in American consulates all over the world. You know about the long waiting times for a visa. The Biden administration is trying to streamline the process to cut the waiting time. If US consulates are not overwhelmed by visa restamping applications, then they can process visas, other visas, faster. So basically, it's a good deal for everyone. Now, this announcement is supposed to be made during Prime Minister Modi's visit. It looks like America wants more Indians to live and work in the United States. Which brings us to the growing profile of the Indian diaspora in the US, the Indian Americans. They make up more than 1.2% of the US population. That's more than 4 million people. It could be a tiny percentage of the population, but this is an influential diaspora. Indian Americans are doctors, tech leaders, CEOs, even politicians, and they play a crucial role in the American society. They're also becoming more and more powerful by the day. But was it always like this? Our next report tracks the rise of the Indian American.
It was the 1900s. The world was still recovering from 2 world wars. But in America, a new generation of migrants arrived, educated Indians. They came to study in US universities or work in professional jobs. Since then, the pace of arrivals from India has been rapid. In 1990, the total number of Indians were around 450,000. Today, there are over 4 million Indian Americans. 2.6 million of them are US citizens. This is further divided into 2 categories. Neutralized citizens, which means people who weren't born in the United States. That's around 1.4 million people. And then there are Indians who were born in America. That's around 1.2 million people. The rest are living on visas and working in the country. This makes Indians the second largest migrant group in the country, only second to Mexicans. Indians make up for around 1.2% of the population. It may sound like a small number, but their influence is much bigger. Let's first compare median household earnings. The nationwide average is around $63,922. For Indian Americans, it's over $123,000. That's almost double the nationwide average. Which brings us to education. About 79% of Indians are college graduates. That's almost double of the nationwide average of 34%. So Indians are educated, they are earning more, and that's reflecting in the jobs that they hold. Most Indian Americans are doctors, tech leaders, and even CEOs. Satya Nadella leading Microsoft, Google's Sundar Pichai, Adobe's Shantanu Narayan, Neil Mohan at YouTube, Leena Nair at Chanel, Ajay Banga heading the World Bank. The list is endless. But tech has always been a forte for Indians. Now they are venturing into politics too. Indian Americans are rapidly climbing political ranks. In 2013, the US House had 1 Indian American member. Today, the Congress includes 5 Indian Americans. There are 50 in state legislatures. The country's Vice President Kamala Harris is of Indian origin. So clearly the community is making a lot of strides. The Indian diaspora of today is a formidable one. They are influential, socially, economically, and more importantly, politically. This is a diaspora no one should underestimate. And the White House knows that. Prime Minister Modi's state visit is a reflection of its growing power.
A lot of things influence foreign policy, like history, culture, even geography. But an equally important factor is personality. You see, policy is driven by individuals. If someone likes you, they will help you. If they don't, they will make your life harder. So let's look at Joe Biden, the President of the United States. What are his personal opinions and what is his track record on India? Well, Biden, as you know, is an old hand in American politics. He was the US Senator from 1972 to 2008. He was Vice President from 2009 to 2016 and President since the year 2021. So simply put, Biden has been around for a long, long time. In his Senate days, he was closely linked to foreign policy. In fact, he served as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. He saw India-US relations evolve up close. And did he approve of it? Well, from most accounts, yes, he did. In the year 2001, Joe Biden wrote a letter to then President George Bush. What did he want? Well, he asked Bush to drop all sanctions on India. Remember, these sanctions had been imposed after India's nuclear test in 1998. Joe Biden wanted these sanctions against India to be dropped. He was also soft on New Delhi after the nuclear tests. In 1998, most senators wanted harsh sanctions. Well, to be honest, Biden also opposed the nuclear tests, but his solution was not sanctions. It was engagement. And this is what he said. India is not a rogue state. It is not a Libya, a North Korea, or an Iraq. It is the world's largest democracy, and it is a country with which we share much in common. Joe Biden was a lone voice then. The nuclear policy shaped his opinion on India. He had another chance in the year 2008. India and the US were negotiating the nuclear deal in that year. And Biden, as a senator, came to India. He was in full support of the deal struck by George Bush. He also voted for it in the Senate. But some of his contemporaries did not, like Bernie Sanders. He was Biden's Democratic rival in 2019. He was one of the 75 lawmakers who now want Biden to lecture Modi. Then came the vice presidency of Joe Biden. He visited India again in the year 2013 as vice president of the US, and he made a trade pitch that has now become a realistic assessment. It was in 2013. Back then, India-US trade was about $100 billion, and Joe Biden wanted it to be $500 billion. The Indian government is also targeting the same now, but Biden talked about it 10 years back. During his presidential campaign, Biden talked about a special bond between India and America, and by and large, his record has been positive. More engagement, more trade, and most importantly, more trust. Under Biden, India became part of the I2U2. This is a West Asian group with 4 members, India, Israel, I2, and the UAE and the US, that's U2. Now we are hearing about jet engines. If Biden clears this deal, it would be a landmark event, almost on par with the nuclear deal, we say. Then you have semiconductors. India and the US signed an agreement to boost innovation in chip making. Both these things are strategically high value, jet engines and chips. Also the Indo-Pacific. Under Joe Biden, the Quad was elevated to heads of state level. The first summit was held in 2021. The latest meeting was in Japan on the sidelines of the G7. I know it may sound like Biden is the perfect partner for India, but remember, there is self-interest here. If Biden is helping India, it's because he's getting something in return, a lot in return, in fact. A valuable partner in the Indo-Pacific, a military and economic power. Biden's India policy is rooted in 2 things. One is realism. The other, you could say, is inheritance. You see, Biden has inherited a pro-India policy. From Clinton to Trump, every president has done their part. Clinton was the first US president to visit India since 1978. George Bush struck the nuclear deal. Obama came for the Republic Day parade. And Trump elevated the relations to comprehensive global strategic partnership. Now it is Joe Biden's turn. He needs to put political capital behind this relationship, but there are challenges too. There always are. Biden keeps talking about human rights in foreign policy. And to be fair, he's not said anything to India or about India, but some in his party want him to. And if he does, well, he risks a lot. For starters, the public opinion back home in India could change. After all, no one likes to be lectured to, especially by an imperfect democracy like the United States of America. So the key for Joe Biden is sticking to pragmatism, to treat India as an equal partner. And yes, that jet engine deal would be nice. So Biden's India policy has been predictable. What about his China policy? Well, not so much. He knows exactly what China is trying to do, replace the US as the leading world power. But on policy, he's blown hot and cold. This week, Joe Biden dispatched his Secretary of State to Beijing. The idea was to patch things up. But the very next day, Biden called Xi Jinping a dictator. So what's he playing at? This sort of ambiguity has been a feature of Biden's China policy. One day he says he will uphold the one China policy. The next day he says he will defend Taiwan. So the Chinese are left guessing. Now this ambiguity could signal 2 things. Either Biden is playing a strategic game of keeping China confused, or he's just gaffing a lot. Now it's a nightmare for America's partners and allies. I'll give you an example. The New Zealand Prime Minister says he disagrees with Biden's dictator remark. He's preparing to visit China soon. So naturally, he had to disagree. Now, you can't send warships and submarines to the Pacific and then you say you want just competition. But that's exactly what Joe Biden is doing right now. On Tuesday, a US Coast Guard ship sailed through the Taiwan Strait. Washington called it routine. China called it public hype. My point is, Joe Biden needs to spell out his policy. Because in Beijing, there is no such ambiguity. They're very clear about what they want. There are new reports of a Chinese training facility in Cuba. Reports say talks are underway. Now, we don't know what kind of training will happen or how big this facility will be, but it raises an uncomfortable prospect for Washington, D.C., the prospect of Chinese soldiers on their doorstep. Cuba is just 160 kilometers from the US. It's the ideal place to spy on America. It's very close, and the government is anti-US. You would know Cuba is a communist country, so they have strong relations with the Chinese. Just 10 days ago, there was another report. It said China is already using Cuba to spy on the US. Apparently, this has been happening since 2019. Antony Blinken raised this issue in Beijing. He says he conveyed his concern to China. Listen it.
Made very clear that we would have deep concerns about PRC intelligence or military activities in Cuba. This is something we're going to be monitoring very, very closely, and we've been very clear about that. And we will protect our homeland. We will protect our interests.
Blinken says the White House will protect its interests. I'm sure they will. The question is how. America has a very rigid policy called the Monroe Doctrine. It was outlined way back in the year 1823. What does this doctrine say? That the US will dominate the Western Hemisphere. No form of imperialism or military presence will be tolerated. And no, this is not an academic theory. American presidents have wielded the Monroe Doctrine. The biggest example, in fact, actually involves Cuba. In 1962, the US found ballistic missiles on the island. It was the Soviet Union's doing. Then President Kennedy threatened to use military power. The world was very close to a nuclear war. We call it the Cuban Missile Crisis. Eventually, a deal was struck. The Soviets removed missiles from Cuba. In return, the US removed missiles from Turkey. Another example is Ronald Reagan. He was president in the 1980s. Reagan used the Monroe Doctrine to intervene in El Salvador and Nicaragua. George H.W. Bush, the senior Bush, did the same in Panama. Do you see the trend here? In the past, Washington has not tolerated rival regimes in the region. So how will they react to China now? I guess we'll have to wait and see. Very little is known about these facilities in Cuba as of now. It's not even clear whether a deal has been struck. Well, if and when that happens, it would signal a new chapter in this rivalry, a more dangerous chapter. Until now, China only projected power in the South China Sea. Beyond that, their capabilities were in doubt, untested. But recent events make you wonder what's going on. In the month of May, a Chinese fighter jet flew dangerously close to a US plane. It was called an aggressive move. In the first week of June, a Chinese warship cut across a US one. And this happened in the Taiwan Strait. And now we are hearing of military bases in Cuba put together. What does all of this tell you? China is more bold and defiant. Perhaps Xi Jinping is getting impatient. Well, whatever the reason, it's something that Joe Biden cannot ignore. He needs a clear-cut policy on China. And now to Pakistan and its latest move. This is about Holi, the festival of colors. It's a Hindu festival, but it's celebrated with fervor across the Indian subcontinent. Now, Pakistan has a problem with it. Earlier this month, a video of Pakistani students celebrating Holi went viral. This was the biggest Holi celebration in the history of Pakistan. It provided a break from what Pakistan usually makes news for, economic turmoil, terrorism, religious intolerance. That's what they make headlines for. But the joy was proven to be short-lived because Pakistan's radical authorities have now stepped in. They've banned all Holi celebrations on university campuses in Pakistan. Our next report tells you why.
These are Holi celebrations in Pakistan. Some university students held the biggest Holi event at the Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad this month. Now remember, Holi was in March. So why the celebrations now? Because the students of the Quaid-e-Azam University organized the Holi event as a gift to their 100-odd Hindu students. This one simple act of celebration challenged their country's social and religious norms. This is how the Quaid-e-Azam University of Islamabad looked on the 12th of June. Young students playing with colors, enjoying their college life, singing, dancing and celebrating the festival of colors. a festival that was wholeheartedly celebrated in Pakistan before partition. Before Pakistan became an Islamic republic. But fun is a risky business in Pakistan, especially when celebrating a non-Islamic festival. Authorities were instantly furious, and then came the Pakistan Higher Education Commission's diktat. Now all Holi celebrations are banned in universities across Pakistan. That's an extreme step. But why exactly is Pakistan so outraged over Holi? Here's what its Higher Education Commission had to say. Such activities portray a complete disconnect from the country's socio-cultural values and are an erosion of the country's Islamic identity. This widely reported, publicized event from the platform of a university has caused concern and has disadvantageously affected the country's image, eroding Pakistan's Islamic identity, damaging the country's image. That's what a bunch of young students playing with colors are being accused of. The fact is, for Pakistan, its Muslim students enjoying a Hindu festival like Holi is an affront to its ideology. It shows how intolerant Pakistan has become. But this is how it operates. Call it a de facto state if you may. Hatred for non-Islamic culture is so deeply ingrained in the Pakistani psyche that anybody challenging it is deeply disconcerting. Just this year in March, at least 15 Hindu students were mobbed by radical Islamists in Pakistan. Their crime? They dared to celebrate Holi at the Punjab University campus. But none of this is really surprising. After all, we are talking about a country where Hindus, Sikhs and Christians are regularly targeted. The space for minorities is shrinking day by day. If an innocuous festival threatens the very idea and ideology of an entire nation, then maybe it's time for Pakistan to look within its fragile state.
For our next story, let's talk about the C word, climate change. For starters, it's real. Our planet is heating up, and there is an urgent need for all countries to come together to ensure timely action. One such attempt is being made by French President Emmanuel Macron, a rather ambitious one. He's hosting a two-day summit in Paris starting today. The agenda is clear: to draw an economic plan for the global south and to help them fight climate change. Now, this is not the first time that such grand plans have been made or talked about. But will this meeting make a difference? Our next report explores.
What comes to mind when you think of summits on climate change? The COP summit, perhaps? A yearly affair where leaders meet, make promises on paper, only to revisit them next year. Now France is adding another one to the list. A summit for new global financial pact. Sounds fancy and ambitious, right? Wait till you hear its aim. To build a new contract between the global north and south to address climate change. Quite a mouthful. Let's break this down. Paris is witnessing a two-day summit. French President Emmanuel Macron is co-hosting this with Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley. Around 50 heads of states and government are in attendance. These include US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Additionally, climate change activists like Greta Thunberg, World Bank Chief Ajay Banga and IMF's Kristalina Georgieva are expected to be there too. So what's on the agenda? Well, multiple things, like restructuring debt and reducing poverty in the global south. But the overarching theme is this: tackling climate change. French President Macron says the next 2 years are critical.
If we miss the target, if we are not sufficiently ambitious and efficient, if we don't move our standards and portfolio, trust of our people will be lost. Which means that all the governments we can engage with you in that direction will be under pressure of their people.
Broadly, the Paris summit plans to take off from where the COP27 ended last year. Remember the Loss and Damage Fund? It aims to help developing countries tackle climate change. Now Macron, along with the attendees, are brainstorming on how to finance this fund. The decisions made here, if any, aren't expected to be binding. And that's exactly the problem while dealing with climate change. You see, climate change is a global phenomenon. The crisis needs to be tackled urgently, and all countries have to come together for this. The COVID-19 pandemic, Ukraine war, and staggering inflation in some countries have only added to the troubles. The economic requirements to fight climate change are significant. As per a UN-backed report, the Global South needs investments worth $2 trillion annually by 2030 to tackle climate change. That's a massive sum. How much have the wealthy countries been able to match? Not even its own target of $100 billion. Wealthy nations like United States of America, Australia, France, Germany had pledged this sum. First in 2009 and then again in 2015 under the Paris Climate Agreement. But how much of this was achieved? As of 2020, just $83.3 billion, well short of their own moderate goal. Reportedly, the $100 billion target is also expected to be missed for 2021 and 2022. And this hasn't gone down well with countries like India.
Developed countries have been promising to finance. They have never delivered on it. They will keep saying, every conference, they will tell developing countries, please raise your climate ambition. So they will raise climate ambition. West, forget about financial ambition. They will not even deliver on old financial promises. And very frankly, this has been a very, very tough and very frustrating experience.
So will the Paris summit be any different? Do not expect any big bang decisions. But a concrete action has the potential of separating it from other climate change summits. And more importantly, taking the first concrete step in fighting climate change.
And finally, we have something about a burial mound. I know this is a topic that rarely inspires excitement, but what if I tell you that we are talking about the Stonehenge of the Netherlands? Stonehenge, as you would know, is in Britain, a well-known, mysterious, prehistoric monument. Now, something like this has been discovered in the Netherlands, a 4,000-year-old religious site. Dutch archaeologists have dug it up. It includes a burial mound which served as a solar calendar. Now, this is exciting news for the world, but mostly for the Dutch. Our next report tells you more.
This is Stonehenge, located in southern England. It is one of the world's most iconic archaeological sites. But more than that, it is also a great enigma. It not only inspires awe, but has spawned countless tales about where it came from. Well, its origin story may not be clear. But according to archaeologists, one thing is, it has a sibling of sorts, but not in England, in the Netherlands. The Dutch archaeologists have made a fascinating discovery. They have found a 4,000-year-old religious site in the town of TL in the Netherlands and have nicknamed it Stonehenge of the Netherlands. It includes a burial mound about 65 feet in diameter. It contained the remains of about 60 men, women and children. But later it had a purpose to serve. This mound was a solar calendar. It had several passages, which were lined up to imitate a calendar. The sun shone directly on these channels, on the longest and shortest days of the year, and with this, people could determine important moments of the year, like festivals and harvest days. But why has this site been dubbed the Stonehenge of the Netherlands? It's because both prehistoric monuments may share a connection, and it has to do with the solar calendar. The Stonehenge too is believed to have been a religious burial site, later moonlighting as a solar calendar. So this latest discovery is quite exciting for the world, but more so for the Netherlands. Because this is the first time a site like this has been discovered in the country, and while the joy is only recent, it has taken a while to get here. Digging on the so-called open-air sanctuary started in 2017. Scientists kept looking for clues, studying differences in clay composition and color. So eventually they discovered 3 mounds, one of which is a solar calendar, and 2 smaller mounds, also a single glass bead inside a grave. This bead was analyzed too, and apparently it originated in Mesopotamia, that is present-day Iraq. This means the bead traveled about 5,000 kilometers 4 millennia ago. How is that possible? That's a mystery. Experts say glass was not made in the region. But that's the thing about excavating burial mounds. They are a treasure trove of knowledge, and sometimes actual treasure. Like the Valley of Kings in Egypt, it was discovered in 1922. In 1974, thousands of life-size terracotta figures representing the emperor's army were unearthed in China. And recently, researchers unearthed a shield-shaped bronze mirror and a massive iron sword in an ancient burial mound in Japan. For decades, burial mounds have been a key to discovering secrets of the past. And they make for fascinating stories, even if they are wild guesses, because burial mounds may be a gateway to the afterlife according to some cultures. But often, they even provide a window to the past.
And finally, it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with France, an explosion ripped through the streets of Paris. At least 37 people have been injured. Some are in critical condition. Local authorities say that it was a gas explosion. Meanwhile, clashes broke out between Druze Arabs and Israeli riot police in the Golan Heights. And SpaceX launched another batch of its Starlink satellites. We'll show you the launch. Finally, what makes the 22nd of June significant? Taking you back in history, on this day in 1941, Germany began the invasion of the Soviet Union. This happened just 2 days after the two sides signed a non-aggression treaty. The cooperation benefited both sides for some time, but the peace did not last. And so, Operation Barbarossa was launched. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
And the Nazis and communists, and the world was plunged into war.
The Nazi rule of force has begun. Machines are matched against machines. Front artillery batteries are squeezing the arm. The Soviet ring of steel is alive and moving, closing in.
Il n'y a pas de captivité, s'il y a... Ouais, je sais pas.
Ignition, engines full power, and lift off. Go Falcon, go Starlink. Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
White House South Lawn, members of the Indian community have gathered here in large numbers. The vibe and symbolism are hard to miss, but this visit promises to deliver more than optics. This is being called Prime Minister Modi's most substantial visit. What did it achieve? What does it mean for the India-US relationship and the changing world order? Catch all the updates and analysis with me, Palki Sharma, only on Firstpost.